I am Adrian Walsh, 34 years old, an independent auditor living in New York. My life has always revolved around numbers, dry financial reports, and lonely evenings in a small apartment in the heart of the bustling city. I never thought I would be the center of a tragedy until that fateful Christmas night at my grandfather's villa in the suburbs of Connecticut. It was a place the upper class often praised as a symbol of wealth, discipline, and prestige. But to me, it was simply a familiar place where I grew up with mixed memories of luxury and cold distance. I drove from New York there in the late afternoon with light snow falling, blanketing the winding roads through the pine forests. The Christmas atmosphere was everywhere. The radio played classic songs like Jingle Bells and Silent Night, but my mood was far from cheerful. I'm not the type who enjoys parties, especially family gatherings like this. The Walsh family, or at least what I once thought was my family, always presented a perfect facade. My grandfather Leonard was the founder of the Walsh Group financial empire, a massive corporation with branches all over the world. My father Gregory was the vice president, always busy with meetings and million-dollar contracts. And me? I chose my own path, staying away from their shadow, working as a freelance auditor to prove I could stand on my own without relying on the family name. When I arrived at the villa, it was already pitch dark. The enormous house with its ancient Gothic architecture sparkled under the Christmas lights. LED strings wrapped around the stone columns. A giant Christmas tree in the front yard glittered with hundreds of glass ornaments, and the scent of roasted meat and gingerbread cookies wafted from the kitchen. I parked next to the Mercedes and Bentleys of the relatives, took a deep breath to steady myself. Just a normal evening like any other, I told myself. Stepping into the main hall, I was greeted by lively laughter and conversation. The grand dining room was magnificently decorated, a long table covered with white silk cloth, silver cutlery gleaming under candlelight, and in the center, a golden roasted turkey surrounded by fresh vegetables. The whole family was gathered, uncles, aunts, cousins, all impeccably dressed, the men in tuxedos and the women in evening gowns. I shook hands with a few people, receiving the usual greetings. "Adrian, you still look sharp," or "How's business going, auditor?" I smiled in response, but deep down I always felt out of place. I had never truly fit into this world where everything was measured by money and status. I found a seat near the end of the table next to my cousin Sarah, a lively young woman who loved talking about her life in Paris. We made small talk about the weather and work while soft piano music played from the corner of the room. Then suddenly the atmosphere changed. The laughter and chatter gradually died down as grandfather Leonard was wheeled into the room. He had grown much weaker since the last time I saw him a few months ago. His face was gaunt, his white hair thin and sparse, and his eyes, once sharp as knives, now looked weary yet strangely alert. The butler pushed him to the head of the table where he always sat like a king. He raised his hand in a weak but authoritative gesture. The room fell completely silent. Knives and forks stopped moving. Everyone sat up straight, waiting. I glanced at him and my heart tightened. His gaze lingered on me for a very long time, long enough to make me uneasy. Despite the room being filled with warm light from the fireplace and candles, a chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. Grandfather had never looked at me like that, not with pride or criticism, but with a deep, haunting regret, as if he were about to say something that would change everything. His voice was weak but clear, echoing in the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, Christmas is a time for us to gather, but it is also a time to speak the truth. I have kept this secret for too long, and now it is time to reveal it." My heart pounded. The truth? What secret? I looked around and saw that everyone else was tense too. My father, Gregory, sitting to grandfather's right, smiled confidently as usual, but I noticed the smile was slightly forced. Grandfather took a deep breath and said, "Adrian, you are not Gregory's biological son." The room fell deathly silent. Time seemed to stop. I felt the blood rush to my ears, a ringing sound overwhelming me. All eyes turned to me in shock, faces filled with astonishment, whispers and disbelief surrounding me. "What's going on?" someone whispered. "Does Mr. Leonard even know what he's saying?" How could that be? I sat there, my heart heavy as lead, as if my entire past had just been ripped from the foundation I had always believed was real. I had grown up with Gregory as my father, even though he was never close. Memories flooded back. The nights he came home late, the scoldings when I didn't meet his expectations, and the absence of my mother, who, he said, had died when I was less than a year old. Now everything was crumbling. Gregory burst into loud laughter, the sound echoing triumphantly through the room. Oh, finally the truth comes out. I've known for a long time. Adrian, he's not my blood. And of course he doesn't deserve to touch a single penny of the Walsh family inheritance. His words cut into my heart like a knife. He turned to me, his eyes flashing with sarcasm and contempt. You were just an accident, a reluctant presence in this house. Don't dream anymore. I stood frozen, humiliated and numb. Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to say something, but my throat was frozen. The man I had called father had never truly seen me as his son. Now it was clear. It had all been a facade. I was not his biological child. The room had barely begun to settle when the whispers spread like wildfire. Some sniffled, others shook their heads in disbelief. But grandfather wasn't finished. He raised his hand again, his voice still calm. I'm not done yet. There is one more truth I wish to reveal. Gregory, you are also not my biological son. Gregory is the child my wife and I adopted from an orphanage long ago. The smile on Gregory's face vanished instantly. His face turned pale, replaced by shock and fury. What the hell did you just say? Have you gone mad? Are you senile, rambling like this in front of the entire family? Gregory stood up abruptly, his face flushed red, pointing at grandfather. What kind of joke is this? I've devoted my whole life to this family. Are you trying to dismiss all my contributions? Grandfather didn't argue or explain at length. He simply signaled to the butler. A thick folder was brought out and placed on the table. Grandfather spoke, his voice tired but resolute. These are the adoption records from the orphanage and the DNA test results. There is no denying it. The room descended into chaos, shouting, crying, chairs being pushed back. Relationships that seemed solid collapsed one after another. One of my uncles rushed to look at the documents, his face ashen. Cousin Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Gregory snatched the papers, flipping through them frantically, but the more he read, the more distorted his face became. It can't be true. I stood still in the eye of the storm, feeling for the first time completely detached from that family. The image of the wealthy, exemplary family I had believed in for so long shattered right before my eyes. All those previous Christmas dinners, those family gatherings, they had all been a false veneer. What remained was a feeling of emptiness, alienation, and a vague fear that this was only the beginning. As the last guests left the villa, they carried with them surprise, doubt, and fear like lingering ghosts. I watched them depart through the large window, their luxury cars rolling slowly down the snow-covered driveway, headlights slicing through the darkness like sharp cuts. The vast villa suddenly felt empty and cold. The lively laughter and conversation from moments ago now echoed only like the howling wind through the hallways. The decorated Christmas trees sparkling under the lights now seemed artificial, as if the entire opulence was merely a hollow shell, ready to collapse under the slightest breeze. I sat there, gripping a glass of wine that had long gone cold, feeling as though the air in the room was draining away the oxygen, making my chest heavy. The servants quietly began cleaning up, the dry clinking of plates and glasses ringing out clearly in the suffocatingly heavy atmosphere. Gregory had left long ago after smashing a glass in his rage, leaving glittering shards on the floor like remnants of an irreparable break. The other relatives quickly dispersed as well, avoiding each other's eyes as if staying even 1 second longer would drag them deeper into the vortex that had just opened. When the room was nearly empty, grandfather's voice suddenly rang out from behind me, weak but clear. Adrian, stay. I have one more important thing to tell you in private. I turned around and saw him still seated in his wheelchair at the head of the table, his face pale under the chandelier light. His voice dropped, losing the usual cold authority. the tone of a man who once commanded an entire financial empire, now reduced to a weary whisper. My heart beat faster. I hesitated, my feet feeling rooted to the floor. Part of me wanted to flee, drive back to New York and forget everything. But another part, the curious and pained part, urged me to nod. He signaled to the person pushing the wheelchair, and we moved through the long, dimly lit hallway, the wheels creaking on the wooden floor like whispers from the past. His study was at the far end of the villa, a place I had feared as a child, with towering bookshelves filled with financial documents, a polished walnut desk, and the faint scent of leather mixed with cigar smoke. This had once been the control center of the entire family, where he made decisions affecting thousands of employees. Now the room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a desk lamp, leaving just two people facing each other in heavy silence. Grandfather signaled for the servant to leave. The door closed with a soft click, as if sealing off all escape routes. We stood there, a few meters apart, the air so thick I could feel his faint breathing. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with regret and helplessness, as if struggling with himself. I swallowed hard, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. "Grandfather, what is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He let out a long sigh, his shoulders trembling slightly. "The truth is, you are my biological son." The world around me stopped. I froze, my mind blank, feeling as though all of reality had just been twisted, leaving no solid ground to hold on to. His words echoed in my head, repeating like a cruel incantation. His son? Not Gregory's, but grandfather's? I stepped back, gripping a chair to keep from falling. Everything blurred. The room spun. One shock after another crashed down, giving me no time to breathe, to understand, or to resist. I could no longer distinguish truth from the ongoing nightmare. Each word he spoke tore away another layer of reality, exposing the foundations I had believed solid, revealing only chaos and emptiness beneath. Grandfather continued, his voice trembling but resolute, as if stopping would mean he could never go on. "In the past, I had an improper relationship with your mother, Elaine Walsh. It happened shortly after she was married into this family, becoming Gregory's wife. We fell in love, a secret affair we had to hide. I felt as though I'd been punched in the chest. The image of my mother, the woman in old photographs with her gentle smile and sad eyes, appeared vividly. She had married Gregory, yet had an illicit relationship with grandfather, a forbidden love between father-in-law and daughter-in-law. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away, but his words crashed into my ears like raging waves. "Why? How could you do that?" I asked, my voice rising in shock. Grandfather bowed his head, his eyes glistening with tears. "It began as a mistake, Adrian. Elaine and Gregory's marriage was arranged for business interests between the two families. She was unhappy and I was weak. We thought we could control it, but everything spiraled out of hand when Elaine became pregnant. It was no longer just a mistake. It was an unforgivable sin. We were forced to live in fear and silence, hiding the truth to protect the family, or at least what we thought was protecting it." I collapsed into a chair, holding my head in my hands. Pregnant, meaning I was the result of that affair. An unwanted child born from betrayal. I imagined the scene. Elaine, young and terrified, pregnant in secret, while Gregory, her nominal husband, knew nothing. Or did he? From his reaction tonight, perhaps he had suspected for years. A wave of disgust rose, mixed with pain. "And then what happened? What did my mother do?" Grandfather continued, his voice growing softer, as if whispering to himself. "After you were born, we tried to keep the secret. But when you were 6 months old, Elaine couldn't bear it any longer. She left, leaving a letter for me. In it, she wrote of the shame, humiliation, and torment that made it impossible for her to continue living in this family. She begged me to raise and protect you and not to try to find her. She vanished from then on like a ghost." Hearing that, childhood memories flooded back like a torrent. I suddenly remembered how, throughout those years, I had repeatedly asked Gregory about my real mother. "Where is my mother, Father?" I had asked as a 7-year-old boy sitting at the dinner table. Gregory always brushed it off with vague answers. "She died long ago, Adrian. Don't ask again." He would say it without looking me in the eye, always busy with the newspaper or his phone. Each time I caught grandfather's silent gaze from across the room. He never intervened, never explained, just looked at me with heavy eyes. Back then I thought it was pity for a motherless child, but now I understood. It was the remorse and helplessness of a father who could not acknowledge his son. My face burned, blood rushed to my ears. My hands clenched until they shook, nails digging into my skin. The man I had once deeply respected, the one who taught me about business ethics and family responsibility, was the very cause of the tragedy that had ruined my life. He was the betrayer who had destroyed Elaine's happiness, Gregory's, and mine. "What have you done? How could you live with that?" I growled, my voice breaking. In my rage and confusion, I started to stand and leave. My legs trembled. I wanted to run from the room from that horrifying truth. But grandfather grabbed my hand, his frail fingers clutching my wrist tightly. "Adrian, please, forgive me. I have lived in torment for decades. To be near my own son, yet unable to acknowledge you, unable to hug you, unable to tell the truth, every day has been hell. I tried to make up for it by protecting you, giving you everything, but I know it wasn't enough." I stopped and looked at him. Amid the anger mixed with pity, I fell into deep reflection. Emotions surged like waves, fury at the betrayal, compassion for him. An old man nearing death, carrying this heavy secret. I couldn't find words to define how I felt, forgiveness or resentment. I just stood there in silence, tears rolling down my cheeks unnoticed. Finally, I gently pulled my hand away, silently walking out of the room, leaving him alone in the dim light. The door closed behind me like the end of a chapter. Christmas night dragged on in heavy silence, snow falling outside the window like grains of time. I drove back to New York, my mind in turmoil, knowing this was merely the beginning of a new tragic chapter I wasn't yet prepared to face. In the days following that Christmas night, I lived like a ghost in my own life. A profound emptiness and turmoil enveloped me, like a thick fog that refused to lift. I avoided all calls from the family, turning off my phone and locking the door to my small apartment in Manhattan. The following days dragged on heavily. I wandered the streets aimlessly, watching the hurried crowds preparing for the new year, yet feeling utterly alienated. I didn't know how to face that truth. I was grandfather's biological son, born from an illicit relationship, a secret buried for 34 years. Every morning, looking in the mirror, I saw only an unanswered question. Who the hell are you? And gradually I realized that what I was avoiding wasn't this family, but myself. I didn't go to work. I just lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with grandfather hundreds of times. Childhood memories flooded back like a torrent. The afternoons he taught me chess in his study, his deep, warm voice saying, "You must think further ahead, Adrian. Don't let emotions cloud your reason." Now I understood. He was teaching me how to live with a secret, how to conceal pain. But I didn't want that. I wanted to scream, to smash everything, yet instead I remained silent, letting the pain seep in like slow poison. One morning, about a week later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. The voice of grandfather's personal butler trembled. "Mr. Adrian, sir. Mr. Leonard passed away last night." His heart stopped in his sleep. The news hit suddenly like a punch to the chest. I collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from my hand. Leonard, my grandfather, or rather my biological father, was dead. It left only a gaping void inside me, as if the last thread tying me to the past had been severed. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just emptiness. He was gone, taking his secrets and remorse with him. I remembered his eyes that Christmas night, filled with helplessness. He knew his time was short, which was why he chose that moment to confess. I sat there for hours, staring out the window as light snow fell, like a belated farewell. 3 days later, the funeral was held at the villa in Connecticut. I drove there, my heart heavy. The atmosphere was solemn but cold, like a staged ceremony. The funeral parlor was adorned with white flowers. The polished walnut coffin stood in the center of the grand hall. Family members appeared with wary glances, the underlying divisions now openly exposed. Relatives gathered, but there was no laughter or embracing. Just cold nods and whispers behind backs. Gregory stood in a corner, his face flushed, avoiding my gaze. Aunt Margaret sobbed quietly, yet her eyes darted toward Gregory as if choosing sides. The mournful air mingled with tension like a ticking time bomb. The priest recited prayers in a monotone. Leonard Walsh, a great man, has passed in peace. But I knew the truth. He departed carrying the weight of guilt. I stood among the crowd, acutely aware of my isolation. Both a bearer of the Walsh name and a stranger within the clan. I wore a black suit, standing straight, but inside I was chaos. People looked at me with unfamiliar eyes, some with pity, others with suspicion. The unnamed pain surged like an undercurrent. I gazed at the coffin, silently asking, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let everything shatter like this?" The funeral ended with mournful violin music. Everyone left quickly, avoiding lingering. A week later, I received an invitation to the reading of the will. A letter from the law office delivered to my apartment. I opened it with trembling hands. The meeting would be at the villa with the entire family gathered. I knew the atmosphere would reek of anticipation and calculation, everyone wanting a slice of the Walsh empire. I hesitated but decided to go. Perhaps this was the way to close the chapter or to begin a new one. I drove to Connecticut, filled with unease. Upon arriving at the villa, tension was palpable from the entrance. Relatives had already assembled in the large conference room, chairs arranged like a courtroom. Gregory sat at the head of the table, his chin raised arrogantly. The moment he saw me, he displayed immediate contempt and sarcasm. "Not even blood-related and you dare show up here? You think you'll get any inheritance?" He sneered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "As the only adopted son who devoted his entire life to Leonard, I'm certain I'll inherit the majority. You're just an outsider." His words cut like a knife, but I didn't react. I simply sat quietly at the far end of the table, expecting nothing and unprepared for any outcome. I didn't care about the money, I only wanted the truth, wanted closure. Attorney William Harper, grandfather's longtime friend, entered carrying a thick folder. He was elderly, wearing thick glasses, his voice calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we shall begin." He sat down, opened the will and read aloud. My heart raced. The room's air grew thick. Leonard Walsh bequeaths to Adrian Walsh 60% of the shares in the Walsh Group Financial Corporation, full voting rights and control of the board of directors, along with a personal trust fund valued at $180 million. The room fell deathly silent. I was stunned, my mind reeling. 60% of the shares? Control? I, the one called not of the blood, now the master of the empire? I looked at William, hoping it was a joke, but his face was grave. Gregory erupted instantly, standing abruptly, his face crimson. "What? This is a farce. Adrian manipulated the will. I demand a full review of its legality." William continued unflinchingly. "Gregory Walsh's inheritance is limited to the family villa in New Jersey, 5% non-voting shares, and a cash sum of $5 million, with the condition that he not interfere in the corporation's operations." Gregory shouted, slamming the table. "Impossible. I devoted my whole life. That old man had gone mad." Other family members whispered, faces pale. William proceeded. "Remaining family members each receive a fixed cash sum ranging from $1 to $3 million, disbursed in one payment, with no accompanying rights or influence over the business." Chaos erupted. Aunt Margaret cried, "What on earth just happened?" I sat there, dumbfounded by the announcement. Why had grandfather done this? To atone? Or to protect me? Gregory turned to me, eyes blazing. "What did you do? Manipulate the frail old man?" He lunged toward me, but William intervened. The attorney confirmed. The will was drafted while Mr. Leonard was fully competent. legally valid and properly witnessed and notarized. Gregory stormed out in fury, slamming the door, leaving behind hostile and resentful glares locked on me. His parting words felt like a declaration of war. "Just wait, Adrian. I won't let this stand." I sat there, heart pounding wildly, knowing fiercer conflicts lay ahead. After the meeting, I stayed to speak with William. "Why did grandfather do this?" I asked. He sighed. "Leonard always considered you his true son. He wanted you to take over, to right his wrongs." But I felt no joy. This will wasn't a reward, it was a burden. I drove back to New York, my mind in turmoil. Would Gregory sue? Would the relatives turn against me? Tension mounted, suspenseful, like awaiting a storm. A week after the reading of the will, I received a court summons. It arrived by mail, a thick envelope bearing the court seal sitting prominently on my desk in my Manhattan apartment. I opened it and skimmed the dry legal text. Gregory Walsh vs. Adrian Walsh regarding dispute over the will and inheritance rights. The plaintiff was Gregory, exactly as I had anticipated and not at all surprised by. From the hostile glare he threw at me as he stormed out of the conference room, I knew he wouldn't let it go. He had always been someone who refused to lose, especially when it came to what he considered his lifelong entitlement. I sat there, staring at the document for a long time, my heart beating with an unusual calm. No anger, no fear, just a weary acceptance. My life had already been full of shocks, and this lawsuit was merely another chapter in that tangled story. I didn't resist or try to evade it. I chose to remain silent and wait for the court date, trusting that the truth and the law would speak for themselves. The waiting days passed slowly, like drops falling from a leaky faucet. I continued my auditing work, but my mind was constantly distracted. Every evening I sat by the window watching the bustling traffic below and wondered, what will I say in court? How can I prove the will wasn't manipulated? I rummaged through memories of grandfather, those afternoons he spent in his study planning for the future. "You must be ready, Adrian," he had once said, his gaze distant. Now I understood. He had been preparing for this very moment. The tension built like a string pulled taut, ready to snap at any second. The trial day finally arrived, at the city courthouse in downtown New York. I drove there early, parked in the damp underground garage, and walked into the cold granite building. The tension was palpable from the entrance. Reporters gathered in the hallway, camera flashes popping, microphones thrust forward like arrows. The case involving the prestigious Walsh family and a fortune worth billions in corporate shares had drawn intense media attention. Headlines proliferated. Inheritance scandal. Battle between an adopted son and a non-blood relative? I pushed through the crowd, head down, feeling as though I were walking into a lion's den. The courtroom was packed. Relatives scattered about with wary glances, reporters scribbling furiously, and Gregory seated on the plaintiff's side, face flushed, his black suit fitting tightly like armor. I took my place on the defendant's bench, heart pounding but striving to appear calm. The suspense surged. Was today the day everything ended, or merely the beginning of hell? Attorney William Harper appeared beside me, representing the estate and defending the deceased's final wishes. He was elderly but sharp, thick glasses perched on his nose, carrying a hefty briefcase. "Are you all right, Adrian?" he whispered, placing a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, though unease filled me. William had been grandfather's close friend, witness to everything, from the drafting of the will to the family secrets. He was my only anchor in this moment. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, banged the gavel and the trial began. The courtroom air grew thick. Whispers ceased, leaving only the rustle of papers. The plaintiff's side presented first. Gregory's attorney, a tall man with a booming voice, stood, his tone dramatic. "Your Honor, this will was clearly manipulated. Adrian Walsh exploited Mr. Leonard Walsh's weakened health, exerting psychological influence to seize the assets." He waved documents, detailing claims. Leonard was frail, delirious, and Adrian had manipulated him into signing. Gregory was called to the witness stand. He stood there, face flushed, voice trembling with anger. "I am the one who was devoted and contributed my entire life to the Walsh Group," he declared, pointing directly at me. "Adrian is not blood related to this family. He's an outsider with no legal inheritance rights. He took advantage of my father's declining health and diminished mental capacity to manipulate and coerce him into signing the will." His words cut like ice, causing a stir in the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically, relatives whispered. I sat there, hands clenched, feeling stripped bare before the crowd. The suspense mounted. Would the court believe him? I recalled the years Gregory had belittled me, driven me away. And now he played the victim. Pain mixed with anger, but I remained silent, waiting my turn. When it was the defense's turn, William rose, his voice calm yet resolute. He submitted the full legal documentation, notarized papers, independent witness statements from grandfather's doctors and friends, proving the will was drafted while Leonard was fully competent. "There is no evidence of coercion or manipulation," William emphasized, presenting medical reports and video footage of the signing. The court examined the materials closely. The judge leaned forward reading, the panel conferring in whispers. Time dragged like molasses. My heart raced wildly. Gregory sat there, face paling, his confidence visibly fading. Reporters held their breath. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Finally, the judge banged the gavel. "The court affirms that Adrian Walsh's inheritance is legal and fully enforceable." Gregory froze, his confidence and arrogance evaporating. He collapsed into his seat, eyes wide, replaced by resentment and unease. He realized he had just lost his final foothold, not only the fortune, but his dignity. Relatives murmured. Some looked at me with new eyes as if I had suddenly become the center of power. I received the verdict with a cold composure. No sense of triumph, just a belated confirmation of a truth I had long accepted. The will was grandfather's intent, now upheld by law. But where was the joy? Only a heavier burden with the responsibility of managing the corporation and facing ongoing hostility. In that charged atmosphere, when everyone thought the trial was over, William unexpectedly stood. "Your Honor, I request permission to submit an additional sealed dossier prepared by Leonard Walsh in advance." The courtroom buzzed. The judge raised an eyebrow and consented. William presented a thick envelope, carefully sealed, bearing grandfather's signature. The judge and panel opened it. Their expressions shifted from neutral to grave. They scanned the contents, faces paling, conferring urgently. The entire room held its breath. My heart pounded, suspense peaking. What was this? What else had grandfather hidden? Gregory sat bolt upright, face ashen, as if sensing disaster. After a brief recess, the judge banged the gavel, voice stern. "Having reviewed the supplemental dossier, the court finds that Gregory Walsh was directly involved in unauthorized withdrawals, money laundering, and illegal dealings over many years under the family corporation's name." The courtroom erupted, shouts, reporters leaping up to photograph. Gregory shot to his feet, face contorted. "Lies. I've been framed." The court ordered authorities to arrest Gregory immediately in the courtroom and transfer the entire file for criminal investigation and prosecution. Police entered, handcuffing him. Gregory cursed relentlessly, protesting innocence and struggling desperately. "What did you do, Adrian? This is a conspiracy." He glared at me with pure hatred before being subdued and escorted out. I sat stunned by the sudden turn, collapsing back into my seat, mind reeling. Had grandfather planned this? To protect me or to punish Gregory? The media quickly exploded with coverage of the shocking arrest that rocked the financial world. Reporters swarmed me outside the courthouse, flashes firing nonstop. "Adrian, how do you feel? Did you know in advance?" I stood silently amid the wave of cameras and prying eyes, feeling for the first time that my life had veered onto an irreversible path. No longer a reclusive auditor, now I was at the center of a scandal with power and danger intertwined. I walked to my car, hands trembling, knowing that Gregory behind bars would not stop. The tension still hung in the air, suspenseful as awaiting the next blow. In the days following the civil trial, the investigation into Gregory Walsh's financial misconduct unfolded urgently and comprehensively, like a storm sweeping through New York's financial circles. I received a call from William. "The federal authorities are involved now, Adrian. They've frozen numerous bank accounts belonging to Gregory and are tracing back covert transactions from years ago." I was sitting in my temporary office at the Walsh Group headquarters, gazing out the high-rise window at the bustling city below. Initial reports came in quickly, millions of dollars secretly siphoned through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, forged documents to conceal illegal investments. This dragged in a slew of partners and related files for questioning. Major banks, former business associates, even some senior executives who had once worked under Gregory. I pictured them being hauled into FBI offices, faces pale, scrambling to justify the shady dealings. The news spread like wildfire, with headlines blaring, "Gregory Walsh, from financial titan to money laundering suspect." Every morning I woke up, checked my email, and found another new article, another call from a reporter. The tension mounted. I knew Gregory wouldn't sit idly in pre-trial detention. He would try to turn the tables, perhaps through his lawyers or old connections. Every ring of the phone made me jump, bracing for the next bad surprise. I tried to focus on work at the corporation, but my mind kept drifting back to the case. I began reviewing the entire books, ruthlessly cutting out the dubious projects Gregory had initiated. Employees looked at me with eyes mixing fear and wariness, tinged with a cold respect. In the hallways and meeting rooms, I could sense the widespread unease, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for an unknown bomb to detonate. The criminal trial officially began not long after, just weeks following his arrest. It drew massive media attention due to the downfall of a once prominent figure in elite finance. The federal courthouse in Manhattan was packed. Reporters crowded outside the doors, cameras flashing nonstop, and curious onlookers gathered. Headlines screamed, "Gregory Walsh faces heavy prison sentence for laundering millions." I drove there early, parked several blocks away to avoid the crowd, and entered the cold stone building. The atmosphere inside was oppressive, like a tragic play nearing its final act. I attended as a party with direct interest in the entire estate and family corporation. I sat quietly in the back, distancing myself from the noise and curious stares. Black suit, tie knotted tightly, but inside I was in turmoil. Reporters sneaked photos of me, whispering, "That's Adrian Walsh, the unexpected heir." I kept my head down, avoiding eyes, heart pounding. The suspense surged. Would Gregory reveal more secrets? Would he drag me into the mud? The judge, an older man with a stern voice, banged the gavel and the trial commenced. The prosecutor presented comprehensive and consistent evidence, painting a complete picture of the crimes. They displayed illicit money flows, millions transferred through offshore accounts, forged documents to hide origins, and years-long money laundering via real estate and stocks. Large screens showed complex flowcharts with arrows tracing funds from the Walsh Group directly into Gregory's personal pockets. "This is irrefutable evidence," the prosecutor declared, voice echoing. Gregory sat in the defendant's chair, gaunt after days in detention, suit wrinkled. His lawyer tried to deny it, calling witnesses former partners, but they stammered, admitting under pressure. All efforts proved futile. The evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom fell silent, broken only by rustling papers and reporters' whispers. I sat there, hands clenched, feeling as though I were watching a film about my own life. Gregory glanced at me several times, eyes full of hatred, sending chills down my spine. What would he say? Would he implicate grandfather or me? Faced with undeniable proof, Gregory Walsh was sentenced to 18 years in prison for serious financial crimes: money laundering, tax fraud, and abuse of corporate authority. The judge read the verdict in a steady tone. Mr. Gregory Walsh is permanently barred from participating in the management or direction of any business. The courtroom erupted. Reporters surged forward. Gregory slammed the table, shouting, "I didn't do those things." This is a conspiracy to frame me. But police were ready, restraining and escorting him away. The sentence concluded in a heavy atmosphere like a dark cloud overhead. I left the courtroom feeling empty, neither relieved nor satisfied, just the inevitable end to a long chain of mistakes. I stepped outside. The cold New York wind whipped my face as reporters swarmed. "Adrian, how do you feel about the verdict?" I pushed through without answering, driving home. In the car, I cried, not for Gregory, but for everything. Grandfather, my mother, and a shattered life. 2 months later, as public attention began to fade, I decided to visit Gregory in prison. I came with more questions than any expectation of remorse. I drove to the federal facility on the outskirts, a grim concrete building surrounded by barbed wire fences and watchtowers. The procedures were strict: metal detectors, document checks, waiting in a cold visiting room. My heart raced, suspense building like the first time I faced him after that Christmas night. Finally, I was led to the visitation area, sitting behind thick glass, holding the receiver. Gregory entered wearing a prisoner's uniform, even more gaunt, gray-haired, disheveled. He sat down, staring at me through the glass, eyes cold as stone. The confrontation was icy, devoid of greetings. "Did you come to gloat?" Gregory spoke first, voice hoarse, eyes bloodshot behind the glass. I shook my head. "Not what you think. I came to ask why." I looked him straight in the eye. "Why did you do those things? Launder money, commit fraud, drag the entire corporation into the mud? What were you thinking, ruining what you always called your life's work?" Gregory let out a bitter laugh, dry and harsh in the small room. He gritted his teeth. "Mistakes? I only did what was necessary to keep this empire standing. And Leonard, that old man, was the real traitor." He slammed his hand on the table. "I devoted my whole life to the Walsh Group, yet in the end he chose you, a bastard with no blood tie, an outsider who contributed nothing to the company." I took a deep breath. "You had no right to drag the corporation into crime just to cling to power." Gregory narrowed his eyes at me, full of contempt. "What do you know? I raised you, fed you, educated you, gave you the Walsh name. Yet you sit in my place, stealing everything. You think you're so clean. You're profiting from it all." He began piling blame on me and Leonard, voice rising, laced with uncontrolled resentment. "Without me, you'd be nothing. I'm the one who should be in that position." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And in that silence, I realized something clearly. The man before me had never seen me as his son, never loved or felt true paternal responsibility. I was merely an asset, something he had invested in, now turned obstacle. Old memories flooded back. Forgotten birthdays, family trips where I was never invited, the cold stares whenever I tried to get close. It all became crystal clear. I lifted my head, voice surprisingly calm. "You were never my father." Gregory froze for a moment. "You were never my father, and I no longer need you to pretend." Gregory roared through the glass. "You'll regret this. I'll get out. I'll take it all back." But this time the words carried no weight. I stood, turned my back, and walked away, feeling something unfamiliar creep into my chest. Not victory, not schadenfreude, but relief at finally releasing the last expectations of a relationship that had never truly existed. The visit ended in coldness and mental severance. I rose, set down the receiver, and left the prison with the sense of closing an old chapter. Outside, a light rain fell, the wind biting cold, but my heart felt lighter. Though I knew the fallout from the Walsh family wasn't truly over, perhaps Gregory would appeal or the media would dig further. At least I had faced it. After those consecutive upheavals, my life seemed to enter a period of temporary calm. But in reality, it was the lull before a greater storm. I returned to New York, driving through rain-slicked streets, my mind still reeling with the image of Gregory behind the glass, his gaunt face, eyes filled with hatred. I pulled over to the curb, turned off the engine, and sat there for hours, letting the rain patter steadily on the windshield. Memories flooded back like a torrent. The mornings Gregory left the house early without acknowledging me, The scoldings over minor mistakes, and now the 18-year prison sentence. He deserved it, I knew that, but the pain still crept in like an old wound that hadn't healed. I wondered if he ever felt remorse. Or did he only see himself as the victim, as he had shouted in the courtroom? The tension still hung in the air, suspenseful as awaiting an unexpected call from a lawyer announcing Gregory's successful appeal. A few days later, William called me, his voice calm but weary. "Adrian, you need to come to my office to finalize the remaining inheritance procedures. This is the last step." I agreed, though my heart felt heavy. That meeting was purely legal, signing documents, confirming ownership, but for me it was heavier than any trial I had endured. I drove to the law firm in Midtown Manhattan, a gleaming glass high-rise under the weak winter sun. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressively quiet. The smell of old paper, the hum of printers, and William seated behind a large wooden desk, piled high with files. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes sparkling with empathy. "Are you all right, after everything that's happened?" I nodded and sat down, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. This wasn't just signing papers, it was accepting grandfather's legacy with all its sins and responsibilities attached. In that quiet space, amid the dry legal documents, I couldn't hold back the question that had tormented me for so long. I spoke, voice hoarse. "I want to ask why grandfather didn't disclose Gregory's criminal documents earlier. If he had done so from the start, perhaps things wouldn't have escalated to this point. No trials, no imprisonment." I looked at him, waiting, heart beating faster. William sighed, pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, and leaned back in his chair. He was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. He viewed everyone in the family, including Gregory, as victims of a tragedy he himself had caused. He didn't want to drive his adopted son down a dead-end path while there were still other options. Leonard had known about Gregory's wrongdoing for a long time, money laundering, fraud. But he chose silence, hoping Gregory would correct himself. That was his way of atoning, not through punishment but through opportunity. I sat there listening, feeling as though a fog was slowly lifting. William continued, voice low. "The criminal dossier had been sealed in advance, Adrian. Leonard entrusted it to me with clear instructions, only to unseal and submit it to the court if Gregory actively sued you. It was like a final line between mercy and consequences. He didn't want Gregory imprisoned unless Gregory forced his own hand, and Gregory did exactly that." His words struck like lightning. I froze, hands gripping the armrests tightly. Grandfather had orchestrated everything long ago like a complex chess game. He had tried to redeem his own mistakes by leaving the legacy to me while quietly building a mechanism to protect me from Gregory's manipulation and destruction. I pictured him in his study, planning in his final years, tormented by thoughts of Elaine, of me, of Gregory. "He loved Gregory in his own way," William added, "even though he was adopted. But he loved you more, his biological son." Tension surged within me, suspense building as if awaiting another revelation, but William only shook his head. "That's all there is. Now you must decide how to live with this legacy." Even so, I couldn't forgive immediately. Both Leonard and Gregory had dragged me into a vortex of lies, guilt, and decisions I had never been allowed to make. I finished signing the papers, stood up, and left the office feeling burdened. On the way home, I stopped at a park, sat on a bench, and watched people passing by. Grandfather, my biological father, had protected me in the way he thought best, but at what cost? A shattered family, a life full of secrets. I recalled that Christmas night, his eyes filled with remorse. "Forgiveness?" I whispered to myself. Not yet. I needed time to process, to understand that the legacy wasn't just money, it was the heavy burden of responsibility. I officially took over the corporation with caution and vigilance. I entered the Walsh Group headquarters for the first time as chairman, carrying no ambition for power, only the weighty sense of duty Leonard had left behind. His office, now mine, was vast, with the polished walnut desk, bookshelves filled with documents, and the familiar scent of leather. I sat in the chair, hands touching the desk, feeling its gravity. Employees gathered in the hallways whispering, "The new boss has come to take over." They looked at me with eyes mixing curiosity and doubt. An independent auditor with no management experience now in control of a billion-dollar empire. The pressure hit immediately. The board of directors was clearly divided. Some old executives loyal to Gregory openly questioned my competence. "Do you even know anything about running a company?" An elderly vice president asked at the first meeting, voice laced with sarcasm. Key projects faced stagnation. Contracts with European partners delayed, stock prices fluctuating due to the scandal. I sat there listening to the arguments, heart racing with suspense. Would they revolt? Would I fail? At the same time, the media and public scrutiny never ceased. The press turned my private life into fodder. Adrian Walsh, from non-blood heir to financial tycoon. Headlines screamed across websites, accompanied by photos of me leaving the courthouse. Reporters called incessantly, even ambushing me on the street. "What do you think of your adoptive father's sentence? Did you know about the wrongdoing all along?" Every decision I made was placed under a microscope. I hired a PR team to handle it, but the pressure remained relentless. Each morning I checked my email and found another new article, another malicious comment on social media. The suspense mounted. Would one small mistake bring everything crashing down? I had to dive deep into the work, personally auditing the entire financial system. Late nights in the office, I pored over thick ledgers tracing Gregory's tracks, dubious expenses, forged contracts. I severed shady ties, firing several old executives, canceling deals with questionable partners. "This is how we've always done things," one vice president protested in a meeting. I looked him straight in the eye. "And that's exactly why we've ended up here today. From now on, we do it differently." That decision caused uproar on the board, but I didn't waver. I learned to make cold, decisive calls, maturing far faster than I had ever prepared for in life. From a reclusive auditor, I had become a leader facing daily crises, falling stocks, disgruntled employees, and critical public opinion. A year had passed since Gregory's sentencing, and under my resolute yet cautious leadership, the Walsh Group gradually emerged from the crisis. The first few months were hell. I stayed up all night reviewing the books, cutting out the shady investments Gregory had left behind, and negotiating with shareholders to keep them on board. The stock price swung like a pendulum, one day surging on good news from a new contract, the next plunging because of an article digging up the scandal. I remember the first board meeting after the criminal trial, the spacious conference room on the top floor of headquarters, with its polished wooden table and view overlooking the Hudson River. The old executives sat there, eyes probing. "Do you think you can replace Leonard?" an elderly vice president asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. I looked him straight in the eye. "Not replace, salvage. We're cutting our losses by 20% on the European project, immediately." That decision silenced the room, then sparked an explosion of arguments. But I held firm, and the results followed. Other projects compensated, the stock stabilized, operations were restructured. I hired a new, younger, and more transparent team, eliminating the culture of under-the-table dealings that Gregory had fostered. Internally, things gradually settled. Employees began to trust me. Meetings lost their former tension. But the price I paid was prolonged isolation and pressure. Every evening, returning to my apartment, I sat alone with a glass of wine, my mind still swirling with numbers and decisions. No friends, no family, just work. I recall the sleepless nights lying staring at the ceiling, wondering, what am I doing? Is this legacy worth it? The pressure built like waves, suspenseful as awaiting a single mistake that could bring everything crashing down. I grew accustomed to the new role, but not without moments when I nearly collapsed. Once, the stock plummeted after an article revealed more details about Gregory's wrongdoing. "Walsh Group, a legacy of corruption?" screamed the headline on the front page. Reporters swarmed the headquarters, flashes firing nonstop. I called an emergency meeting with the team. We go fully transparent, release complete financial reports. That decision saved the situation but left me exhausted. I flew to London to negotiate with partners, sitting on the plane with trembling hands holding documents, anxiously thinking of failure. If they pull out, the corporation collapses. But I persuaded them and the contract was signed. Gradually, the company revived, revenue up 15%, a refreshed workforce and the press shifting tone. Adrian Walsh, the savior of the empire. But I felt no pride, only fatigue. Loneliness enveloped me. I avoided parties, declined social invitations, focusing solely on work. On the exact anniversary of Leonard's death, 1 year after he passed, I decided to visit the cemetery. The New York air was chilly. Golden leaves drifted along the highway to Connecticut. I brought a simple bouquet, just a few white roses, nothing elaborate, no media or assistants accompanying me. I wanted to face the past privately without fanfare. I turned off my phone, drove alone, my mind drifting back to memories. Over the past year, I had changed more than I ever imagined, from an outsider on the sidelines to someone forced to lead an entire corporation. Yet the pain of my origins still smoldered like a wound that would never fully close. Grandfather, the man who was both my biological father and the source of every tragedy, had left me an immense legacy, along with an unshareable burden. I parked outside the cemetery, a place so peaceful it felt chilling, with rows of gray stone graves aligned under ancient trees. A cool breeze blew through, carrying the scent of damp earth and a familiar emptiness. I walked slowly along the gravel path, the bouquet growing heavier with each heartbeat. I whispered in my mind, "Grandfather, I've done what you wanted. But why did everything have to begin this way?" The cemetery was silent, broken only by distant birdsong. As I approached the grave, I noticed a strange woman sitting in front of the headstone. She was seated on a nearby stone bench, frail figure in an old coat, gazing blankly at the grave as if she had been there for a long time. My heart tightened. Who was she? A distant relative? An old friend? I approached quietly, trying not to startle her. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel was soft but audible. She turned. Her pale face caught the weak sunlight. The moment our eyes met, she froze, mouth opening as if to speak but unable to. I stopped dead, feet rooted to the ground. That face, though faded by time, deeply lined with wrinkles, hair gray and disheveled, matched hauntingly with Elaine Walsh, the mother in the old photograph Leonard had once shown me. I kept that photo in my wallet, a young woman with a gentle smile. But now she was here in front of me, very much alive. My heart pounded wildly. Suspense surged like a wave. Instinct told me this woman was my mother, after all these years of disappearance. Elaine tried to stand and flee in panic, hands trembling as she gripped the bench, eyes avoiding mine. She staggered as if ready to escape the memories. But instinctively I reached out and gently grasped her wrist. I said, voice hoarse from shock, "Please don't go yet." Because if I let her leave, then I knew I would carry another void that could never be filled. She stopped, body trembling, eyes glistening with tears. We stood facing each other for a long time in heavy silence, the wind whispering through the cemetery like echoes of the past. I looked at her, searching for traces of the woman in the photo. The sad eyes, the lost smile. She was gaunt, dressed in worn clothes as if life had worn her down. The suspense mounted. What would she say? Deny it? Or vanish again? Before I could speak, Elaine suddenly broke into sobs, years of pent-up emotion bursting forth. She collapsed onto the bench, hands covering her face, cries echoing in the empty cemetery. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mingling with the cold wind. I said nothing, just stood watching silently, letting those tears flow like a belated confession without words. My heart ached. For all these years I thought she was dead, but she had been living with her own pain. Memories flooded back, childhood nights asking Gregory about my mother and his evasive glances. Now it was clear. She had left out of shame, guilt over Leonard. I wanted to hug her, but my limbs felt frozen. When Elaine gradually calmed, wiping tears with her old sleeve, I spoke, voice steady but trembling. I know the whole truth about my origins, about grandfather, about you. There's no more room for secrets. Elaine crumpled again in pain and guilt, clutching her chest, voice breaking. Please forgive me, my son. I'm not worthy. I abandoned you, left you alone with everything. I was truly so ashamed, so humiliated that I couldn't stay. She repeatedly begged for forgiveness, as if that was the only thing she had carried through her years of wandering. Her words cut into my heart like a knife. She spoke of the years drifting, living in solitude, following family news from afar. I knew about the scandal, but I didn't dare face it. I stood there, thoughts in turmoil, not calm enough to forgive immediately. The pain of abandonment lingered. Anger toward grandfather and Gregory still smoldered. But I no longer had the strength to drive her away. She was my mother, the missing piece of my blood. I could only stand frozen between two choices without answers. The cold wind whipping past, carrying the scent of the roses I placed on the grave. Elaine quietly turned away, wiping her final tears. Her voice was so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. Please let me go. I won't appear before you again. Live well, my son. She walked slowly along the gravel path, her frail figure gradually disappearing behind the old trees. I remained alone before grandfather's grave, watching silently, suddenly realizing that things we thought buried deep in the past always know how to return. Just when we believe we're strong enough to forget. My heart raced, suspense surged. Was she truly gone? Or was this a beginning? I knelt at the grave, whispering, Grandfather, why didn't you tell me? Why leave it like this? The cemetery was peaceful, but my heart was in chaos. On the drive home, I drove slowly, mind reeling. That encounter changed everything. Now I had to find her, had to confront it. But the corporation's pressures remained, and this new secret left me more unsettled than ever. In the days following the encounter at the grave, I lived like a sleepwalker, caught between reality and the past. Over the past year, I had poured all my energy into the Walsh Group, transforming it from the ashes of scandal into a smoothly running machine. Revenue soared thanks to new contracts in Asia. The stock price stabilized at record highs, and internally there were no longer any simmering disputes. Employees began calling me the savior, but I knew better than anyone. It was only a facade. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my luxury apartment in Manhattan, wondering, where is she now? How is she living? That question tormented me, making work feel even heavier. After days of endless rumination, I realized that avoiding it would only allow the past to haunt me in subtler, more persistent ways. I couldn't let her disappear again. I needed to confront it one more time, even if I wasn't ready. Lacking the courage to appear in person, I feared she would flee or that I wouldn't be able to control my emotions. I decided to hire a discreet private investigator. I found him through a recommendation from William. A middle-aged man named Jack with a tiny office in the New York suburbs. No sign, just the smell of stale coffee and cluttered files. I spoke in a low voice, showing him the old photo of Elaine and describing the graveyard encounter. I need someone followed. Provide me with information about her current life on the absolute condition that she never notices. No contact, no frightening her. Jack nodded, his eyes flashing with professionalism. I understand. Daily reports, photos, and notes. It's expensive, but discreet. I agreed without haggling, heart pounding with suspense. This was a risky step. If she found out, she would vanish forever. But I had no choice. The first days of waiting were hell. I checked my email constantly, even during meetings, anxious that Jack would report he couldn't find her. The corporation's pressures remained relentless. A major contract nearly collapsed due to a partner's lingering concerns about the old scandal. But I pushed it all aside, thinking only of her. A few days later, the first report arrived via encrypted email. I opened it in my office, door locked, heart racing. Elaine Walsh currently lives in a rundown house on the outskirts of Pennsylvania, about 30 miles from Philadelphia. The house is old, with a leaking roof and damp walls, located in a remote area completely cut off from the glamorous world she once entered, and was then pushed out. Attached were photos: a small wooden house with peeling paint, windows covered by old curtains, surrounded by overgrown fields and rusted fencing. I collapsed into my chair, hands trembling as I zoomed in. She, the woman who had once been a Walsh daughter-in-law living in luxurious villas, was in a place like this? Suspense surged. How was her life? I imagined her alone in that house, hearing the wind howl through cracks at night, her pain sealed inside. The report continued. She rents the house cheaply, pays in cash, and does not use her real name. Goes by Ellen White. I swallowed hard, feeling as though I were invading a secret, yet unable to stop. In the following days, reports poured in steadily, each one tightening my chest. I received photos with brief notes documenting Elaine's impoverished and silent existence. One photo: her leaving the house at dawn, wearing a faded old coat, frail figure hunched as if trying to shrink from others' gazes, walking along a muddy dirt road to the bus stop. Note: she works at a small cafe in the nearby town, morning shift from 6 a.m. to noon, low wages, mostly tips. Another photo: her shopping at a discount store, cart holding only a few marked-down items and wilted vegetables, face lowered to avoid the cashier. Unstable income, often skips meals, observed eating only one main meal a day, mostly bread and black coffee. I looked at a photo of her sitting alone inside the house, taken from afar through a window. The room barren, devoid of any sign of attachment or joy. Worn sofa, rotting wooden table, no pictures, no TV, only a sense of guilt and self-isolation. My heart ached. Had she lived like this for years? I recalled the letter grandfather mentioned. She left out of shame. Now it was clear she was punishing herself, living like a ghost. The suspense grew with each new report. How is she today? Is she all right? In the notes, the detective observed that Elaine interacted with almost no one. She avoids neighbors, only nodding if necessary. Once, when a neighbor asked about family, she showed clear panic, face pale, hands shaking, hurriedly leaving with an excuse. Attached photo: her standing outside the door, back turned to the neighbor, posture hunched. She has no friends, no visible mobile phone, lives in complete isolation. Returns home early each evening, locks the door tightly, lights out by 8 p.m. I sat in my high-rise office, looking down at the bustling city, feeling the vast chasm between us. She, my mother, was living like a prisoner of her own making, while I was here with power and wealth. Remorse surged. What should I do? Meet her in person? But I was afraid she would run, afraid of facing the pain. Work pressures intruded. An emergency meeting about a supply chain crisis, but I was distracted thinking of her. Adrian, focus, I told myself, yet the suspense remained. What if she's ill? What if she needs help? One afternoon during a board meeting, my phone vibrated in my pocket, Jack's number. I excused myself and stepped out, heart pounding wildly. He spoke urgently. Adrian, Elaine collapsed on her way home after work and was taken straight to the nearest hospital. I'm at the scene. Neighbors called the ambulance. She's stable but needs monitoring. The world spun around me. Collapsed? I pictured her falling on the dirt road, frail body under light rain. Which hospital is she in now? I asked, voice trembling. Jack gave the address, a small hospital in Pennsylvania. I immediately left the meeting, told my assistant to cancel everything, and drove there in a state of confusion and worry I couldn't even rationalize. Why was I so concerned? She had abandoned me, but I knew I could no longer stand on the sidelines at this moment. The car sped along the highway, wind whistling through the window, my mind in chaos. What if she dies? What if this is the last chance? The suspense was higher than ever, hands gripping the wheel tightly, speeding past limits, ignoring cameras. Pennsylvania appeared with vast fields and the small hospital in the remote town, its neon lights flickering in the fading afternoon. I entered the hospital. The familiar antiseptic smell hit me immediately, the long, quiet hallway with a few elderly patients waiting in silence. I stopped at the reception desk and asked a nurse about the woman just admitted from emergency. The nurse glanced at me, then motioned for me to follow. She led me down the corridor to a room. She whispered, "Ellen White, fainted from exhaustion. Your family, right?" I nodded vaguely, heart racing. The attending doctor, a middle-aged man with a visibly tired face, stepped out and explained briefly. "She has severe debilitation due to overwork and prolonged malnutrition. She needs monitoring and complete rest. Working too hard and eating poorly for a long time have nearly depleted her body." I nodded, but my mind reeled. Overwork and malnutrition? Had she tormented herself to this extent? I stood frozen outside the room door, looking through the glass. She lay on the white bed, eyes closed, face gaunt and fragile in a way that made me realize the past had not only left mental scars, but was quietly eroding her physically as well. Her skin was pale, thin arms attached to an IV drip, the heart monitor beeping steadily. I wanted to go in, hug her, ask why, but my feet wouldn't move. The suspense surged. Will she wake? Will she recognize me? I sat in the hallway, head bowed, tears streaming down. The graveyard encounter had only been the beginning. Now I had to decide, stay outside or step into her life. In the days that followed, I kept vigil at the hospital as if it were an unbreakable habit. I canceled all meetings at the Walsh Group, telling my assistant I needed time for personal matters, and spent most of my hours sitting by Elaine's bedside. This small hospital in Pennsylvania became my temporary world. The familiar antiseptic smell, the steady beeping of machines, and the cold fluorescent lights illuminating the hallways. I sat there more than I spoke, as if I myself didn't fully understand why I was there or couldn't yet find a reasonable excuse to leave. Each morning I drove from a nearby hotel to the hospital, bought a black coffee, and sat outside the room waiting for the nurse to allow me in. Work pressures still piled up through my phone. Emails from the board asking about new investment decisions, calls from partners worried about the quarterly report, but I pushed them all aside. "I'll handle it later," I texted curtly, though my mind was in turmoil. The suspense still crept in. What if she wakes and drives me away? What if she disappears again? I recalled leading the corporation, the cold decisions that saved the empire, yet now, facing this woman, my mother. I felt small and powerless, like the little boy who once asked Gregory about her. At first, Elaine kept her distance, deliberately avoiding my gaze. She lay there with eyes half open, but whenever I entered, she turned her face away, answering briefly and cautiously. "Thank you for coming," she whispered when I brought water, but her voice trembled as if afraid any conversation might cross the boundaries she had set for herself. I understood. She had lived in isolation for so long, with guilt and shame as her constant companions. The years of wandering, odd jobs at cafes, living in that rundown house, all had built an invisible wall. I sat a few steps from the bed, watching her from the corner of my eye, heart racing with suspense. What does she think of me? A stranger from the past, I wondered, not daring to push. Instead, I did small things. Pouring water, adjusting her pillow, or buying fresh fruit from the nearby market. I was quietly present, letting time create a safe space between us. No grand words, no questioning, just silent presence, like an unspoken promise that I wouldn't vanish. Gradually, those silences began to fill with scattered, trivial stories. At first, they were about everyday things. How chilly the weather was in Pennsylvania, or how bland the hospital cafeteria food tasted. We didn't touch the past directly, no mention of Leonard, Gregory, or the night she left, but we no longer completely avoided it either. Once she asked about New York. "You live in the big city? You must be very busy?" I told her about the bustling streets, avoiding mention of the corporation. She listened, eyes distant, nodding occasionally. In those conversations, I realized I still felt an unnamed void. Not resentment. I had moved past anger, but the absence of years that never existed. As Elaine's health steadily improved, the doctor said she could be discharged after a few more days of observation. She began talking more. She sat up in bed, her gray hair neatly combed, eyes no longer evasive. She asked about my current life, one question at a time, slowly and cautiously. "How's your work? Is it tiring?" Her voice was so soft it was almost a whisper, carrying concern mixed with guilt, as if afraid she had no right to ask. I told her about the Walsh Group, not in detail, just that I was managing the family company and facing daily pressures. "Sometimes I just want to walk away from it all," I said, admitting it aloud to someone else for the first time. She listened, eyes glistening. You really resemble Leonard, always shouldering everything." Her words made me pause. It was the first time she called me you in a maternal way, though she quickly corrected herself. I began to understand that Elaine wasn't someone who had willingly abandoned me. She too was merely a victim of a chain of mistakes and power that had crushed an entire life. She vaguely recounted the years after leaving, working in diners, moving from town to town, always living in fear of being found. "I didn't want to drag you into it," she whispered once, eyes averted. Those words cut like a knife, yet made me pity her more. The suspense still lingered. Will she accept me, or flee again when she's better? The day Elaine was discharged, the weather in Pennsylvania was unusually sunny. The doctor signed the papers advising rest and proper nutrition. I stood by the bed watching her gather her few belongings, a couple of old outfits, a cloth bag. The offer came out more naturally than I expected. "Would you come live with me?" "In New York, so I can take care of you." She froze, hand pausing mid-motion, eyes wide with shock. Elaine hesitated, torn between fearing she'd burden my life. "I don't want to be a weight on you," and unable to hide her longing to be near her son. She stood between the choices, face pale, hands clutching the bag tightly. I waited, heart pounding with suspense. Will she refuse? Will she disappear? Finally, I affirmed, "Not out of duty or atonement. I want us both to have a chance. We've lost too much time already." Elaine accepted in silence mixed with emotion, tears streaming down, nodding without words. I hugged her gently for the first time, the feeling strange yet warm. We left the hospital, her leaning on my arm as we walked to the car. On the drive to New York, she gazed out the window, whispering thanks. Suspense rose. Was this a fragile beginning or a mistake? The first days living together were awkward, like two strangers trying to adjust. My apartment in Manhattan was spacious and modern, with a view of the glittering city, completely opposite her rundown house in Pennsylvania. I arranged a separate room for her, simple with a new bed and essentials. Elaine confined herself to a small corner. She kept her room tidy, cooked simple meals from the groceries I bought, but always asked permission first. "Would you mind if I use the kitchen?" she asked, voice cautious. I wasn't yet used to having someone quietly waiting for me each evening. For years I had lived alone, coming home late after long meetings, grabbing takeout and falling asleep in silence. Now every time I opened the door to find the lights on and the faint smell of food in the air, I paused for a moment, heart quickening at the unfamiliar sensation. A vague suspense crept in. Could I get used to this? How long would she stay? We ate dinner together, facing each other but maintaining an invisible distance. Conversations were brief, revolving around the weather or daily news, like a silent agreement to avoid the past we weren't ready to face. Gradually, small acts of care emerged, like seeds sprouting in barren soil. Elaine began leaving simple meals ready when I came home late, a fresh salad or hot soup. "I saw you look tired. Eat something to feel better," she said softly. I, in turn, quietly paid more attention to her health, buying vitamins as the doctor recommended, reminding her to rest, even hiring a cleaner so she wouldn't have to do heavy work. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both felt the shift like an undercurrent, warm and seeping into daily life. In that slow, cautious rhythm, mother and son began learning to reconnect, heal, and rebuild a fragile but genuine relationship. I told her about work, the tense meetings, the board's pressures. She shared about her years in Pennsylvania, early mornings at the cafe, but skirted the reasons for leaving. Suspense remained. Moments when conversation neared the past, I tensed, waiting for her to withdraw. But gradually we moved past them. In one very ordinary moment, everything changed. One late evening, I came home exhausted after a prolonged meeting, took off my jacket and called out, "Mom, could you get me a glass of water?" The word mom slipped out naturally, like breathing. Elaine was in the kitchen. She turned, stunned, eyes wide. She stood frozen for seconds, then tears fell uncontrollably, streaming down her cheeks. She rushed over, hugging me tightly, her frail body trembling. "You called me Mom, didn't you?" she whispered, voice breaking. I hugged back, tears falling too, warmth spreading through me. For the first time, I felt something close to a real family. Not perfect, not loud, but warm enough to make me believe some things could still be rebuilt after all the loss. We stood there long, embracing in the kitchen, the clock ticking, echoing. The suspense faded, replaced by fragile hope. But I knew this relationship was still vulnerable. One wrong word, one old memory could shatter it all. I whispered, "Stay with me, Mom." She nodded, crying and smiling at once. In the weeks following that moment, our lives gradually settled into a rhythm, though uneasy silences still lingered. Elaine, my mother, began adjusting to life in New York, even if at first she shrank back like an uninvited guest. She tidied the apartment with gentle movements, cooking simple dishes from her childhood memories. Warm vegetable soup, crisp toasted bread with butter, things that reminded me of the rare dinners at the Walsh Villa when I was young. I came home earlier, skipping late meetings to spend time sitting with her at the table, talking about trivial matters. The erratic weather, an old movie on TV, or how this city was far too noisy compared to peaceful Pennsylvania. She smiled more often, a gentle smile that made me see my own face in the mirror, the sad eyes, the lines at the corners of the mouth. But the pressures from the Walsh Group never let go. The stock fluctuated due to a minor lawsuit from one of Gregory's old partners, forcing me to fly to London for negotiations. "Be careful, son," she said as she saw me off at the door, hands clutching tightly as if afraid of losing me. I hugged her, warmth seeping in, but suspense still simmered beneath. Is everything okay? Or is this just a temporary illusion? The fragile happiness had barely taken shape when I began to sense a growing unease. It started with small, almost harmless details. A strange car parked on the street longer than usual, footsteps echoing in the hallway at midnight, or the feeling of being quietly watched, me in the apartment whenever night fell. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia from work stress. I had grown used to anonymous threatening emails or reporters sneaking photos, but gradually it became more pronounced. One evening, coming home late after a tense meeting, I noticed the kitchen light flickering abnormally, as if someone had rummaged through it. "Mom, is everything all right?" I asked Elaine, heart racing. She shook her head, but her eyes flashed with panic. "I probably just forgot to turn off the light." I checked the security cameras, nothing unusual, but the unease clung stubbornly. One late evening on the way home from the office, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Elaine's number. I thought it was her familiar habit. She often called to ask if I'd eaten dinner so she could reheat something. A small gesture that warmed me after long, exhausting days. "Mom, I'll be a bit late," I rehearsed in my mind, ready to answer with a smile. But when I picked up, instead of her usual gentle voice, I heard panic in her ragged breathing. "Adrian, someone's trying to break in," she whispered, voice breaking, accompanied by pounding on the door. "I'm hiding in the room." Then the call abruptly cut off, leaving only the cold beep. I froze for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel until they went white. The world around me blurred, streetlights smearing, car horns distant. I immediately called the police, voice trembling. There's a break-in at my address. Get there now." Then I floored the accelerator, the car surging through New York's night streets, running red lights, tires screeching on wet pavement. My mind went blank, filled with only one thought: get home as fast as possible. The image of Elaine, my mother, hiding in a dark corner, body trembling, twisted my heart. "Nothing can happen to her," I muttered, tears rolling down unnoticed. The car sped across the Brooklyn Bridge, wind howling through the open window, suspense surging like never before. If I'm late, that person could harm my mother. As soon as I arrived, I screeched to a halt in front of the building, leaping out without turning off the engine. The apartment door was wide open, cold wind rushing in, interior lights flickering abnormally as if the wiring had been tampered with. Ignoring the danger, I rushed inside, running and calling for her in utter terror. The house was pitch black, furniture in disarray, couch shoved aside, books scattered. I ran to the kitchen, then the living room, calling louder. From a hidden corner behind the bookshelf in the study, Elaine burst out and clung to me, body shaking, hands ice cold. She sobbed uncontrollably, face ashen. "Son, he had a gun. Be careful." I held her tightly, feeling her frantic heartbeat, the smell of fear mixed with sweat. "I'm here now. It's okay," I whispered, but inside I was in turmoil. We stood there embracing, cold wind gusting through the open door. I quickly held her close, pulling her toward the exit, steps hurried. But then a cold shout from behind froze us both. "Don't move, or I'll shoot both of you, mother and son." The voice was unfamiliar, hoarse through a mask. I turned slowly, heart stopping, and saw a masked figure aiming a gun at us. A tall, dark silhouette, the black barrel glinting under the dim light. He was at the back door, likely having sneaked in that way. Instinctively, I shielded her, pulling her close to my chest, back turned to him. "Don't shoot. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt us," I said, voice shaking but trying to stay calm. The suspense peaked. Time slowed. I could hear my breathing, hers, and the sound of his finger tightening on the trigger. The intruder let out a guttural laugh, voice distorted. "Not money. This is a greeting from the old man." And he fired. The gunshot tore through the air, echoing like thunder, accompanied by a cry escaping my throat. Pain, a burning agony spread from my shoulder. But then I realized it wasn't me. Elaine had lunged forward to shield me, her body jerking, blood spraying from her chest. She collapsed into my arms. I held her tightly, screaming in despair. At that moment, police sirens wailed in the distance, blue and red lights flashing down the dark street. The assassin cursed, panicked, backed away, then turned and fled through the back door, vanishing quickly into the night. I knelt on the floor, cradling Elaine. Blood soaked my clothes, still warm. Trembling, I pressed my hand to the wound, voice breaking in choked breaths. "Why did you take the bullet for me?" Elaine looked at me, eyes fading but clinging to me with her remaining strength. Her lips moved faintly. "I'm sorry. Live well, my son." Police and ambulances arrived moments later, flashing lights, shouting voices, everything chaotic. They pulled me away, placed her on a stretcher, but in that instant I already knew. All efforts were just belated formalities. Elaine was gone, choosing to sacrifice herself to protect me, as a final act of atonement for a lifetime of silence and torment. Just hours later at the police station, I sat empty, clothes stained with dried blood, hands shaking around a cup of water. The police reported the masked man was captured on the outskirts, and under interrogation he confessed that Gregory had hired him. From prison, he had contacted an old lawyer, paying a large sum to deal with Adrian. I heard the news without strength for hatred or rage, just emptiness like a deep void. Gregory, the adoptive father who had despised me, was now a murderer, yet why no anger? Perhaps the pain of losing my mother overwhelmed everything. The police asked, "Do you want to say anything to him?" I shook my head. No need. He would face additional charges, likely life, but to me it was merely the end of a cycle of hatred. I arranged Elaine's funeral simply and quietly, without ostentation, fitting her silent life full of loss. I chose a small cemetery on the outskirts of New York, peaceful with green trees, no media, no Walsh relatives, just a few close friends from the corporation and William. Simple coffin, white flowers, and a brief prayer. I stood silently reading the farewell. "You gave me a second chance, Mom, and I will live worthily." Light rain fell as if the sky wept for the words that couldn't be spoken. Everyone left quickly, leaving me alone before the fresh, wet earth of the grave. Standing at my mother's grave, I ached but refused to collapse. The pain cut into my heart with every beat. Yet amid the loss, I silently vowed to live more kindly and clearly, seeing her passing as a final reminder of love, responsibility, and the boundaries needed to prevent tragedy from repeating. She had sacrificed for me, an ultimate act of maternal love, and that moment made me understand how fleeting life is. The message I drew from it all: I realized that family isn't built on blood ties or titles, but on honesty, responsibility, and how people protect each other from wounds they themselves inflict. The Walsh Group, grandfather's empire, had once symbolized wealth, but was truly riddled with lies. Gregory, Leonard, and even Elaine had all been swept into that vortex, and I nearly was too. But through loss, I learned the lesson. Hiding mistakes in the name of appearances only prolongs tragedy across generations, and silence in the face of wrong is sometimes a form of complicity. Grandfather stayed silent about the affair, Gregory about corruption, Elaine in her shame, all leading to ruin. The advice I give myself is to choose to live differently. No avoiding truth, no continuing silence to cling to relationships sustained only by pain. I learned to be brave enough to set boundaries, to say no to wrongs, and to accept that not everyone bearing the family name has the right to hurt me. Only by facing truth and ending the painful cycles passed from generation to generation can people truly heal, and a new family exist through love rather than guilt. I returned home after the funeral. The apartment was emptier than ever. I sat in the kitchen where we had once embraced, crying alone. But the next morning I rose and returned to the Walsh Group with new resolve. Full transparency, cutting away all old shadows. Gregory received a life sentence, but I will never visit him again. Hatred only prolongs tragedy. I began finding ways to help victims like my mother, donating to funds supporting women in hardship, living more simply. Each evening I look at her photo, whispering thanks. Suspense about the future remains. The corporation could face new crises, but I am ready. My life, after all, is about healing, not revenge.